Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
On this episode of the Massive Change Show, we visit with Jeremy Stockdale, whose daughter's t-shirt sparked his shift from corporate good guy to leadership coach teaching gender equity and systemic awareness. Enjoy the show. So, Jeremy, hello from the UK. This is an international call. Virginia and I are in Mexico City, and you're in the UK. And so welcome to our show. I think it's I think back to my original reason I did an outreach to you, because I'm constantly looking for guests. As you have in your LinkedIn profile, hashtag smash the patriarchy. Don't see a lot of dudes with that. So anyway, yeah, welcome to our show, and thank you. Yeah.
No, thanks for inviting me. I love the fact that we can do things like this, no matter where we are in the world. It's
exactly.
Really beautiful about having this conversation, like we're sat next to each other, even though we are thousands of miles away. So
yes,
cool.
Right, it is,
and it's also rewarding to know that we are in many places of the world fighting for the same thing.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I love about kind of my LinkedIn is the amount of people I've contacted in Australia, New Zealand, obviously many in the States, but in Africa, across Europe. It's fabulous. It does give me a lot of hope, Virginia.
Yeah. And we need more hope. So when you and I first met, Jeremy, a couple months ago, you have a very fascinating kind of backstory about how you became what I call an activated white dude. So share a little bit about that, and then we'll get into our system shaker questions. But I think that's really important context to how you arrived at putting Smash the Patriarchy in your LinkedIn profile.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. So let me give you the short story, then you can feel free to ask questions. But I think the main point is that my first career was spent working for a big corporate for 27 years. And the privilege I had was leading large teams. That's what I discovered by accident, and discovered that after a couple of years that I found it very rewarding. So that's what I did. I loved leadership. And when I left in 2019, I genuinely believed, and as I was setting up my company, that I was and had been one of the good guys. I thought I understood, there are some challenges that different people face. And I thought I'd done as much as I could to do something about those and to help people. And in 2021, I read a couple of books that just made me realize that I hadn't done nearly enough, because I just didn't know enough. I mean, they just blew my mind. And I realized that I spent over half a century not knowing how at least 51% of the global population experiences the world. And I thought, well, having also gained a bit of recognition for the fact there's many things that I've been privileged to not have impacted me over the course of my first 50 odd years, I thought, well, with that privilege comes responsibility. So I want to do something about it. So I spent a couple of years educating myself about, gender, about different other forms of kind of, disadvantage, and started speaking about it a little bit and putting my ideas out there. But the Smash the Patriarchy thing really simply came from my daughter, who is at Bristol Uni doing modern languages. And a few years ago, when she still does, she has a T-shirt that says, "On Wednesdays we smash the patriarchy." And I quite like the quirkiness of it, and we often talked about it. We'd shared books and we'd discussed feminism ever since she was quite little. And I eventually persuaded her to let me write a post about it. And on the back of that post, which was quite well received, I then wrote the following week about how the patriarchy impacts women in more generic terms. Then the following week about how it impacts men negatively. And it's just continued from there. So it's over 2 years now, nearly 2.5 years I've been writing these posts every single Wednesday. And it's just created a real following. But it all came back from me having a bit of a dawning quite late in life that I've been wrong about a number of things. And I need to learn and find out more and then do something with the privilege and the influence I've got.
Yeah. Yeah, just again, before we get into the system shakers, I want to say this because it's a very seminal moment for me. I've always been kind of a feminist. My grandmother was she wouldn't have called herself a feminist, but she was very like, she didn't take shit from around like gender roles and things like that very, very much. I mean, and a lot of other things. So I never had that, like, even growing up in Christian fundamentalism, which is, patriarchy times 1,000.
Yeah.
I always thought it was all kind of fucked up, to be honest with you. And so, but I remember when I first met Virginia about 5 years ago, and we're having conversations like we still have today. But and Virginia, said something to me that you said, we're talking about the difference between feminism in the U.S. and feminism in Central America, where you're from, Virginia, and Virginia, you had said to me, in the U.S., women fight for equal wage and maybe body autonomy, and in the U.S., I mean, in Central and Latin America, they fight for the right to live. And I remember it like hitting me like in my soul. I was like, holy shit. I'd never thought about it that way before. And that became what we now call, or Virginia calls this, and is systemic consciousness, like just this awareness of patterns. And you're like, oh, that once you see that, you can't unsee it unless you're an asshole, like, so anyway, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I have another question for you. I mean, before the first question that we asked to system shakers, you mentioned something that it resonated with me a lot. I mean, first, I'm so excited to hear that you learn and you kind of shape your feminist view with your daughter. I think that is wonderful for you and for her as well, to have that kind of role model from the her father. And you said that patriarchy also impacts men in a negative way. And that is so true. I mean, part of my whole life, I've been a feminist, and I've been part of social movement. I've been working with tons of women's organization. And I preside one of the largest women's fund in the global South. And one of the fight that we have from many years ago, I mean, decades ago, was that gap between, when men decided to, especially straight men, decided to join the cause, let's say, or become aware of the discrimination and oppression and everything that patriarchy embeds, they talk about themselves as, well, it's not my problem, but I'm an ally. I'm going to support you because I'm a good guy. And part of there was a group of us that says, like, it's not our problem versus your problem. It's everybody's problem.
Yeah.
You are also highly affected by patriarchy, even though you don't see it that way. And maybe you even think that some of them are privileged. But when you look deeper, it's not all privilege. You have to pay a high price for sustaining the system as it is. So can you tell us more about how you figured it out and what was your view about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear your kind of thoughts and the way you frame the question, because I have a real problem with the term male ally. It started off kind of with thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. Men acting as allies, kind of like the idea of that. And then there's a point where it starts just make me feel a little bit ick, just like, just like, something just getting a bit sick in your mouth, and just, yeah. But now I actually think there's something fundamentally wrong with it censors men as
Yes.
good guys. It's just,
Yeah.
and so I was also on a post on LinkedIn recently, which was quite interesting. They said, I don't quite understand the term, because if I describe myself as a female ally, this is a woman, I bet you would think that I was a feminist. I was an ally to women. And I thought, well, yeah, probably is what my brain would do. It would go straight to that. When it's male ally, you sort of think of, and we all know there's a bit of a pedestal effect as well. As soon as you put your head above the parapet, and people often think it's really courageous to post what you post. Well, I guess there's an element of you putting yourself out there, but most people go, oh my God, it's amazing you're doing this. And it comes from a good place. My love language is words of affirmation, so I appreciate all of that. But yeah, it's not about me. it isn't about me but being a good guy and suddenly doing something for women. That probably was where it started out, Virginia. But the more I started to understand this stuff and the more I read, the more I realized that it's not about men being kinder to women or women actually doing more for men. Because often these things seem to be put in conflict. You talk about some of the issues women face and say, yeah, but what about boys and men? And it's like, well, yes, as well. If you
Hmm.
were writing about the importance of we need to save the whales, no one's going to come up and say, yeah, but what about the sharks? It's not going to happen, is it? You can have those two thoughts at once. So, long-winded way of saying, I started to really, as I thought more deeply about it, how I had been conditioned throughout my entire life to behave in a certain way, to think in a certain way, to limit myself in certain ways. And like I say, I pretty much sailed through life with the usual kind of bumps that people have, but without an awful lot of the hurdles that some people have simply because of their race or their gender or whatever else it might be. But yeah, I mean, as an example, I realized I saw a post about men showing emotions and crying. And this is the night before I did one of my usual posts. So I quickly rewrote my post and I wrote about the fact that from the age of 18 until my mum recently passed away, I'd cried 5 times since the age of 18 up until, June. And literally it was like, I remember crying when I got my A-level results not because I was sad at the results, they were terrible, but I cried because my mum was so kind to me and said she's still proud of me. It just made me kind of get quite emotional. I cried when my nan died or at her funeral. I cried when I spoke about her at my wedding. I cried when my dad died, and I cried at his funeral. That was it. Those are the 5 occasions when I've actually expressed one of the most fundamental emotions. I don't think it's held me back. It's not healthy. It's not. That's kind of strange, isn't it? So I think there's a whole range of things and I realize now about the way I've shown up in many ways in the early part of my life without realizing it, have been quite limiting for me. But that's just kind of a privileged white guy. You look at how the impact there is in so many men and boys in terms of their mental health, in terms of their educational opportunities. This system, we are fighting a common enemy. That's the thing. And what the patriarchy wants us to do is divide us and have us fighting each other. What we should be doing is coming together and fighting the system that is holding us all back. I mean, it seems really prosaic to me. Much easier said than done.
Yeah. Especially
Yeah, I
Jeremy, when
have.
there's no motivation for you and I to change, like outside of moral clarity.
Yeah.
Like if we were just completely humanistic, if we were like, there is no soul, morality is relative, which is a lot of people these days, especially people that claim to be religious. They really practice moral relativism. And so this to me is why it's a kind of consciousness. It's like you can't have the courage to actually fight the system if you're not doing it. It can't just be for you. There has to be almost like a calling to do it. And that's something you and I bonded over in our first thing, is like, we don't, like, practically speaking, need to do this. You could still be a leadership coach and I could still be a brand guy, but we have both pivoted our businesses to serve this higher calling. And I'm not saying, look at us, aren't we amazing? I am saying,
Yeah, but
that's why we're kind of a rarity, honestly, because
yeah.
of that.
It's interesting. You just got me thinking that I wonder whether, because one of the challenges I face is how do you convince people who are very stuck in their ways? As we tend to get older, we tend to, very generalization, but that would be my observation. As people age, they tend to, their lives can potentially shrink a little bit. I've observed it happening to my mum. I've heard it happens to lots of people as they get older. They just think, okay, well, perhaps they'll shrink their friendship groups, their hobbies, or whatever it might be. Because you get very used to what's comfortable. But I also see a lot of leaders get to positions of power and influence and think they don't learn anymore. They're done learning because they've already made it. Why do they need to do that anymore? On the other hand, I think there is the paradox is that is perhaps holds people back from change at that stage. But then the other thing is that there's something about when you get to a certain age, and particularly if you're not struggling. I mean, I'm not saying anything's easy, but if you're not struggling financially or whatever else, There's a really lovely Denzel Washington description. I don't know if it's his or I just heard him quoting it, where he said that, you know, the three stages of life are you learn, you earn, and then you return. So the first 20 years you're learning, next 40 years you're earning, 30 or 40 years, and then you get to a point where you're then in a position where you can actually give stuff back. And I remember that being quite a profound thing that struck me when I left my corporate career. I was nearly 50, and I suddenly thought, oh, I can actually, I'd love to share some of the stuff that I've got and some of the experience I've had with other people, and do so for some good, you know, just because I can. And I also felt that in my corporate career I was restricted slightly because you get kind of pigeonholed and you've got to go to pointless meetings, so it kind of restricts your ability to do good. So yeah, I think there is something where if we could harness more of that, because the other reality is that the people who are still with the most positions of power and influence do tend to be white dudes in their 50s plus, sadly. But
True.
yeah.
I would like to just make a point or a reflection on the things that you were talking a few minutes ago about how this is that is very rare to find men like you, and especially on top of that white, right, and straight, that have that level of consciousness. And I think that the level of feminism that we have, men and women, really is linked to the level of consciousness that we have. Justin was mentioning systemic consciousness, and I think that is very related to how we understand justice and how we make it our problem as well. Because if we think of feminism and gender equality in general, you know, equality in general as just the individuals, it's like how I treat my partner, my wife, my girlfriend, my daughter, my boys, you know, my children, my sons. That is a very limited way of understanding equality. And, you know, even my coworkers, when we stay at the level of interpersonal direct relationship, then it's easier to position yourself as the good guys. It's like and as allies. But when you think about the whole system and how everything is interconnected and how everything affects everything else, then it becomes your problem as well. Because gender inequality is affecting economies, is affecting food supplies, is affecting culture, is affecting you know, how things work in general. Everything is affected by the difference and the inequalities that we have among humans. So at the end, you're going to be affected. Your wallet is going to be affected. Your opportunities to get a job is going to be affected. Your self-esteem, your health, mental, physical, emotional health is going to be affected if you are not part of the struggle, if you don't join the cause and the fight. So when you go from the personal awareness, you know, the consciousness saying like, oh, well, you know, I have the moral, I have the moral responsibility to be equal and to fight for equality for everybody. Or I just have the convenience. I want to have a partnership or a relationship that is more equal for many reasons. That's one level. When you think like, no, that should apply to all women and children and girls, and that's another level, more social awareness and social consciousness. But when you think that everything is affected and every aspect of your life is going to be affected by systemic patriarchy and the way the wars work, then you raise your consciousness saying like, this is not optional for me.
Yeah.
And I have the story that I really like of a colleague of mine. We worked together for 15 years in the same organization, a nonprofit organization in Nicaragua. And I saw his evolution as a man. He started very young with us in a youth program. And obviously he was surrounded by young feminists at that time. And he started learning. He was, you know, he took his time, but one time he said something that was a reflection and said, I became a feminist in stages. At the beginning was I was just aware of my, you know, I learned a lot from the women around me and say like, oh, these things are not fair. We need to fight unfairness. And I was very driven into justice. So that resonated with me. Then I became an ally, meaning that I was also fighting for others women's right and for all women's right and girls' right. But then I became a conscious man because I realized that everything is also affecting me. And that was not an ally of somebody's problem. I was fighting for my own rights,
Yeah.
my right to have a partnership where everything is distributed, when she's as happy as I am, where we are two complete human beings sharing a life together, where I'm not the only provider in the family. I don't have to, carry that burden in my shoulders, being the only one. I can express my emotions and be a healthy man because of that. I can be supported by her because she's a strong woman and capable woman. So I can rely on her and can be supported. I can raise my children in a way that they're both really capable of reaching their potential, whatever they want to be. That's the life I want for myself, not just for the women in my life. And that is the switch that he made, is like coming from being an ally, meaning that's not my problem. I could afford not participating in this, versus I can't afford to not participate in this because it's affecting me as much as everybody else. So I think that's still the conversation we need to have with more men about what it means to believe in these values.
I completely agree. I mean, there's a couple of things there that really resonate. That is a lot of the messaging I try and give when I'm talking to men or groups of men. Actually, it's about people, because misogyny is not just a male problem. I mean, I don't know. So there's an awful amount of internal misogyny out there as well. But I think what it shows is that to understand these things, when you've been socialized in the system we're in for however many decades, even if you're still relatively young, it is an awful lot of learning you have to go through, and it's a real journey. It takes a bit of time. It starts off just you become a bit more aware of certain things, like the young friend you mentioned. Then you actually think, oh, I can do some stuff. I can actually do some stuff that's helpful. In other words, I can do some allyship, to the people around me. The real shift, though, as you say, is when you realise that this is a challenge, and it's an opportunity for humanity. And I think where a lot of this kind of work hasn't worked, and a lot of one of the reasons why we've got a DEI backlash, because I think there are some very bad actors out there who are fighting to hang on to what they've got and strengthen their position even further. But I think there's also been a backlash because a lot of the work has been done badly. In other words, it's tried to fix people through a few workshops. It's tried to tell people that they've been wrong and tell them about all their biases, and just make people feel a bit shit at times without any kind of real. So that generally doesn't really work that well with humans, does it? It's like, I think so that the way it's been messaged has been done, and it's kind of been negative. The messages have been negative. Whereas, to your point, there's a huge opportunity that is just waiting to be grasped, and it is basically called the empowerment of women. Because, as you said, if you do that, if I think Christopher Hitchens made a similar kind of quote, but I often misquote him. But if you give women, autonomy over their lives, bodily autonomy, give them perhaps a little bit line of credit, it lifts everything in that community. It'll improve things socially, culturally. It'll lift people out of poverty. It'll improve medical advances. It'll raise the economy. It works every time. You look throughout history, it always works, and yet we're still playing around the edges of that. And that's the opportunity that we have. It'll make men happier. Women feel more fulfilled. We all will be better off. And I don't think we've done nearly a good enough job of exactly what you're articulating, which is selling that positive progress we can make. But also recognize that that's going to take years. It's going to take a long time. So let's start the journey now. Let's get men starting to think about things and not punish them for getting it wrong, and not to expect them to immediately kind of get all the answers. I'm still learning. I've been really learning about this properly for about 5 years, and I'm still learning all the time, and I still make countless mistakes. So I think you make a really good point, and I've been trying to do that a little bit more with some of the things I'm talking about, is try and actually position it from a economic opportunity. This is actually what we're leaving on the table. I was in one of my favorite places, Mauritius, and I did a keynote over there about inclusive leadership and gender balance. And one of the things I talked about the empowerment of women, and I just compared Mauritius to the top countries in the world for gender equality and how well they're doing. and Mauritius is ranked 107 out of 146 countries on gender equity. The opportunity for it to go up just 20 places and what that would do economically, socially, is huge. And actually, it's a country that's doing okay, but it's definitely struggling in certain elements. You know, it's quite a small place, so that you haven't got massive opportunities, but you make the most of what you've got. So I think I think it's a great opportunity to really position this differently.
I absolutely agree. And I think that is we need to start changing the discourse that way, so people start seeing how it benefits everybody, and that men are not the enemy. I mean, men as a gender is not the enemy. Like, anybody is the enemy. It's a system, and we need to understand what we're all part of it, and we're all reproducing it and keeping it in place at our own detriment.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good time. It's a good segue to ask you the first question. So, considering everything you're doing and the way you think, what is that big idea that you have that will piss off most powerful people?
Well, I think the very idea of smashing the patriarchy seems to piss off a lot of people. You know, a lot of that is because it's not really understood what I mean. Some think I'm having a go at men. Some think the language is quite divisive. And of course, you can't always, when I post on Wednesdays you smash the patriarch and then start to talk about something, you can't always say, but by the way, what I mean by this is this. So you can't always go into the backstory every time. So that does piss certain people off. I think that the really big idea, though, that will definitely piss off powerful people, but actually has the opportunity, I think, to change the minds of powerful people, which is ultimately what you want to do, is the whole idea of selling to people the benefits of gender balance. And I'm not just saying, I don't think gender equality particularly works well, because people don't need to be treated the same. It won't work if you treat people the same. Because what you're trying to do is fit everyone into a system that doesn't really work for people. So that's what gender equity has a bit more kind of weight to it. But even that feels like it excludes certain people. It's kind of lifting some people up rather than kind of making sure everyone's better off. Gender balance for me means we take care of everyone, and everyone has gender. Everyone's on the spectrum. It's not that everyone is impacted by their gender to some degree. And some more than others, but it's we all have impacts. And so that is the big idea, is how do we create situations where we're truly embracing the opportunity from gender balance, even within ourselves. I became a far better leader when I realized that I didn't just have to follow the agentic traits that all leaders did, like being, I had to really dial up my assertiveness, my confidence, my logic, my discipline. Not things in every case that are core strengths, and woe betide I should show vulnerability or anything like that. Once I realized that by being vulnerable, compassionate, kind, generous, it would actually make me a better leader and make people much more willing to follow me, and it made me a better leader. So long before I even knew that gender was a thing, I'd recognized that I could leverage those different things, and how I ended up leveraging those is because for 2 years, and I was just starting to develop into a half-decent leader, I worked alongside a woman called Nora, and I learned so much from her about emotional intelligence, about the way different people think, because she just gave me a different perspective. And it then made me, it almost had a conscious decision after that. I often used to think, what would Nora say? And for that, I'd be thinking, well, who are the women in my team that I can just ask their opinion? I'd always be mindful of making decisions with just men in the room, because there's probably going to be a little bit of affinity, but a bit of bias there lent towards our common views. But I'll ask a woman's opinion, go, well, I don't know if you thought about this. And so, oh my God, of course we didn't, So I think gender balance is the big idea that will piss off some people, because I'm hoping that when they understand it will piss them off less than smashing the patriarchy and that kind of stuff. But I'll keep smashing the patriarchy on Wednesday. I don't mind who it pisses off. What I actually want people to do is I want people to disagree with me. I want to find out and then have a conversation about, okay, so I'm interested, you think that. Why do you think that? Now, some people don't want to engage. They just want to have a go at you. And that's okay. That's fine. But I've been surprised by how many people then you end up having quite a good conversation with, because they come from a different frame of reference. So by understanding where they come from, it will educate me and inform me. And we might be going, well, I can understand, I mean, I probably you don't want to talk about it on this podcast, but last week's assassination, it's so obvious what was going to happen in a way. But for me, that was an opportunity, I think, for people to come together and go, okay, so this is a tragedy. A human life has been ended in the most horrible way. The ramifications of that, for when someone speaks freely, and we also, First Amendment free speech, we want to protect that. When someone speaks free, this can happen. That we all have to come together to look at what we do. But no, what's actually happening is creating more division, blame, and that's really my sort of big worry that we're just getting more and more divided, and we need to find a way of bringing that back. So
yeah. So as you did you have a follow-up, Virginia, on your question before I go to the second one? Sorry.
No, that's
Okay.
that. Go ahead, because I have questions about your question later.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay. So now we think about it from a challenge standpoint. So I'm going to, you can, Jeremy, ask this however you want, or answer this however you want, but I want to frame it from this thing where you have in the last couple of years kind of shifted your business model of who you work with and what your leadership expertise to really there's very little gap between who you are, your mission, and your in your business.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you're facing related to that from almost like a brand or business development perspective? I'm going to get really practical on that part first.
Yeah.
Because the reason I asked that, Jeremy, is a lot of people, I think there's a lot of people that see what I've done or what you're doing, and they're like, yeah, that's cool. Like, that's cool that you're doing that. They're like, good for you, but then they don't. And I'm not condemning them for not doing it. Sometimes you got to eat and you got to pay the bills. And I'm not judging people that don't make such a provocative stance in the world, unless they're in senior leadership positions. Then I think they're just cowards. But that's different. So in this case, though, what are you facing related to kind of, let's call it market acceptance or market resistance related to your brand and your pitch, your generating leads, et cetera?
Yeah.
Well, I will add. I want to add just a tiny question to that question, so you can answer both at the same time. How being a man actually is either benefiting or making more of a challenge, pushing forward your agenda.
Okay, so let me give you an honest answer. It might, I wouldn't seem pithy, but the reality is that I recognized about 18 months ago that ever since I set up my business YLead, which I did during the pandemic, but I started trading in 2021. So this is now my 5th year. I've literally made it up as I've gone along. So I think in terms of the idea that how have I had to pivot my business model, because you're making it up as you go along, I've just kind of made it up as I've gone along. So, and that's just the honest truth. What I had started to realize, though, that if I want the business to have an impact on the world, which I do, I don't want it to be a lifestyle business, one that pays the bills and is purpose driven and I feel good about, but I want it to actually have an impact. And if it's going to do that, then I need to be much more focused on growing it and being commercial about it and speaking to more people and working with more people. And in order to do that, you need to have a story to sell. You need to be able. So I've been working on that lately, but it always started out as a leadership company. That was my passion. And I believe passionately that leaders had to lead themselves in order to lead people, in order to lead the business. And I thought very often those aspects at the very beginning were missed. And so that's what I really want to do. And I called my business YLead because I wanted to help other leaders find their why. What's your purpose as a leader? I also fundamentally believe that the world would benefit from more female leaders. I always thought that. And I also knew that my feminine energy as my communal traits had helped me as a leader. So having more balance to my own leadership made me more effective. So I believe that taking a less one-dimensional approach to leadership would help not only me and others, but the world. So me going and spending, what happened was, as you're absolutely right, in 2023 and 24, I spent an awful lot of my time doing work purely in the gender space. So I was doing keynotes, I was doing talks, I was running programs on allyship, and I spent a lot of time in that space, which was really good for my education and my understanding and learning more about something I've become very passionate about. But it's almost come full circle to me now. Some of that is contextual, but some of it just ultimately what I was doing when I was developing programs around allyship, it all came down to just inherently good leadership traits and just traits of being a good human. And and so actually, it doesn't matter if you lead that way, if you think that way as a human and behave that way as a human, then you will become a good ally for people, whether it's through gender, through race, disability, socioeconomic background. You'll just become a better. If you're a leader with influence, then you can have more of an influence on other people. You can create better environments. So ultimately, the answer to your question is, because I made it up as I got along, it hasn't really had a negative impact or a positive impact. I think now, though, that my focus is back on really driving and pushing for inclusive leadership, and with a very clear message that the standard of leadership around the world in all walks of life is so poor. You know, even in the best places, it's kind of like okay or it's mediocre, but the general standard, you got many more dreadful leaders than you have really good ones, and that's just madness. So work needs to be on leadership, but I also think that taking a more more balanced gendered approach to leadership would have a huge impact. Would have a huge impact as well. So brand wise, I think the whole process I've been through the last couple of years, and also looking at the fact if you kind of label yourself a DEI champion, which I never have done, or even though I found myself in that space, you're probably not going to get through some doors. So I'd much rather focus on the leadership side and then bring in what I've learned and my knowledge around gender into that, because it will clearly improve it. To answer your question, Virginia, I think being a man hasn't done me any harm at all. And in fact, I've no doubt it's got me into spaces and got me onto stages and in front of rooms full of senior people that women wouldn't have been allowed into. Or even if they had, they wouldn't have been listened to or taken as seriously, even though they probably got much, much more knowledge than me and certainly more lived experience than I've got. And I used to struggle with that a little bit when women used to first point it out to me, not with any kind of spite, just acknowledging that that's the reality. And I think, but that's not fair, is it? But actually, if that is the reality, then I need to be using that platform to help and to influence people. So no, I think being a man in this space is actually beneficial. I think it's much easier to be a man in this space than it is to be a woman in this space. Genuinely.
Yeah.
It's an interesting advantage if it's like if they, and I know you do this, is like they have to quickly understand that you're not like DEI light, like, oh, it's like you're probably going to be maybe even more aggressive with some of your your observations of power and power dynamics and gender equity and things like that. So
I can be really brutally honest with people, because I can say, here's some of the things that I used to do. Here's some of the things I didn't do because I didn't know. And that's just the reality,
Yeah.
And so it means I can be brutally honest about those things. So, but once I knew better, I thought I'd better do better. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, and then it's easy for men to, as we were saying earlier, to dismiss that, saying like, oh yeah, that would be nice, but it's it's a luxury. It's not my problem. I can't afford to do it now. It's like I don't have time or whatever. So coming from another man saying, hey, I'm in the same position and I believe in this and this is why it's important and this is why you cannot not afford to change and to become that. So I think that privilege, society gives us privilege that we didn't earn, let's say, in many ways because of our skin color or gender or whatever. I think that is our responsibility to use those privilege instead of just enjoying them, saying like, well, how am I going to turn that power that I have into something that empower others as well? And the challenge with, if I can get into the closed circles that most people don't have access, and I have access to those circles, then I'm going to influence in those circles as well. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really big responsibility, and that's kind of, I really did feel a profound sense of responsibility, and I probably had a lot of freedom because I was no longer working for a corporate. There was less risk because I'd never any bosses to answer for, any brands to kind of I could just do and say what I wanted. So, but I do see a lot of performative allyship, and some of it I see from the people that are really vocal on social media, and I've got big platforms, and then I see behaviors that I think, oh, okay, so that doesn't quite stack up. That doesn't mean people can't make mistakes, because we all make mistakes. That's absolutely fine. But I've always believed my epiphany with leadership was I just found I realized the privilege it was to have people that I was responsible for in the workplace, particularly large numbers of people of all ages, backgrounds, etc. And I kind of thought the responsibility I felt for that was really a huge one, and I really embraced that. And it's the same with this. When you realize you've got a lot of privilege and people listen to you and want to get you into their rooms to speak to them, it comes with huge responsibility, and it's really unacceptable to shirk that. And then sometimes you've got to put on your big boy pants and do stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable. But that's what we have to do, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And you have to model that. I mean, it's important for men to become a role model of how you go about to change and transform your views, and also how you go about treating people in a different way.
Yeah.
It's in the daily stuff. It's in the leadership decisions and actions and communications that you make that makes the difference. We're running out of time, but I want to ask you the last question. So the last question was about the impact that you said, I want to increase my level of impact. So let's say in 10 years, what will be indicators that we can observe, indicators that you have reached the impact that you wanted?
Yeah. So I think the things that we will be seeing, and in 10 years, I think is a great time frame, because by then I won't even be 70. So I'll still only be in my mid to late 60s. So I'll still have plenty of time to enjoy what I've created. But I always feel those kind of time frames give you something to aim for. What I would love to see is that we are observing in our workplaces, and I hesitate to say it, but maybe even in governments. But let's start with workplaces for now. Far, far better standards of leadership. That you would start. Leadership has a net positive impact on people, on organizations, and on society. Now, currently, one of the problems, there's no real way of measuring that, because we don't measure leadership impact. The way we measure it is your boss happy with the numbers you produce? If your boss is happy, you're a good leader, which of course is nonsense. I would quite like to create some form of measurement of leadership and it's assessed by the people they lead. And I've had ideas about that. I've patented something about 5 years ago, and I just haven't launched it yet, haven't had the platform to do that, but it's still something I'm planning to do. But either way, we would start to clearly have a way of seeing that leadership is having a more positive impact. And it's doing so because we actually treat leadership as a technical skill that you need to learn, just like you'd have to learn about marketing, or you'd have to learn about finance if you're going to be a finance director, or you've got to know how to code if you're going to be working in technology. Kind of give people and go, there you go, lead. And it will pop you on one or two courses about random management acts. No, you need to teach people how to lead. So I think that would be one thing. You would start to definitely see more data that shows that people are less burnt out, more engaged at work, that you've actually got, we wouldn't be seeing the kind of the drop off of women in the workplace. I don't even think. I mean, ultimately, yes, I guess more women in senior positions is a good indicator. But the trouble, that's the only one we really look at, and you can kind of fix that overnight if you wanted to, just by putting women in place. It doesn't mean anything's really. But when you can see more women staying in the workplace because policies have been introduced and culture has been introduced that don't make them feel guilty for trying to raise their children at the same time, that actually there's shared parental leave, so more men are leaning in and playing a part in that. When those things are happening and you can see less of a drop off and you start to see more of a pipeline coming through in senior positions, I think for me that would be a really measurable impact. Ultimately, we're 134 years away from gender equity. If we could make some real progress in the next 10 years, we might just be able to get there. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I'd love to think we can get there in my kid's lifetime. But it's currently 5 years away. We might be close to putting someone on Mars, so Jesus.
Yeah. You're more hopeful than I am, but that's good. So, so as we wrap here, how would someone know that how would someone listening to this, how would they know to who to introduce you to? If you're looking for, opportunities to bring in your leadership coaching, or like, what are some indicators of a good lead, to put it in very practical terms?
So what I look for when I work with clients these, I set out with a very clear criteria, but you kind of still learn a bit as you go along. For me, I don't mind doing one-off things, one-off talks, because it is a way of perhaps igniting things and getting your foot in the door. But I always make it clear to people, if I do that and nothing else happens, then you've kind of wasted your money, really, because nothing else will happen, So I like to work with clients so my criteria are quite simple. First of all, you've got sponsorship and genuine, authentic advocacy from the top of the organization. So if you're doing some work for leaders, but those at the top think they don't have to change, they're okay, and aren't going to show any interest, and going to provide a bit of budget, that for me is a red flag. So top down, real committed leadership from the very top, if we're going to do some leadership work. The second thing is it has to be taking place. You've got to have as much focus on application as content. So I can bring in really interesting content that's entertaining and engaging, but actually it's the application that is more important. So if the program isn't designed to help people to apply what they've learned, then yeah. So that's another thing. So you got sponsorship from the top, and you've got a sort of time frame of elapsed time where the work takes place. And then the other thing is clients actually want to see a measurable impact. Barclays, my first company, spent a fortune developing me over the 20 odd years I was a leader, and not one penny of that was ever measured. It's just all left to chance. And so I'd want to see that any engagement I do with clients, that we know where we're starting from, and we've got a way of actually measuring the impact of the work I do. So if you've got clients that are genuinely committed to doing leadership development that is going to actually make a difference, change the culture, and they're prepared to invest, then I would love to speak to those people.
Great. That's great. Well, we're gonna jump into our second show, as we call it, and talk about what we heard from you. And thank you so much for staying up a little bit later, maybe for something like this, whatever the time it is where you're at. And I'm sure this is the first of many conversations. And keep doing what you're doing. So
thank you.
Yes.
Well, likewise, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you both, and I appreciate you having me on your podcast. And I can't wait to actually watch back the second show.
Yeah, great. Sounds good.
Yes.
All right. Take care, Jeremy.
Thanks,
All right.
Thanks, Virginia.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
So the second show for Mr. Stockdale's episode. You go first.
Yes. Well, actually, I would like to hear what you think about it, because as a feminist, I have a lot of things to say, and I did say a lot of my ideas. I couldn't help myself actually during the show.
Of course,
Usually
right,
we let our guests to take most of the time during the show, but I couldn't help myself, because especially the notion of how to use for men that are conscious like that, how to use the power that you have, the spaces that you can open with, just because you're a man, or even more if you're a white man, straight, that have access to a lot of circles of power where policies are being decided, where values are being, culture is being constructed and defined or limited. When you have access to those spaces, I think you have the responsibility to influence those spaces for the good of everyone, not just the people participating there. And few people do that, but even fewer white straight men. So I commend him for using that space and that privilege to actually make an impact and to influence those spaces and conversations, same as you. But I think we need to do more of that. We need to be more aware of where are the spaces where I have some power and I have some influence, and how can I use that to shape the conversations and to shape the agenda and to shape the policies and the values and the culture that we are constructing in those spaces. We all have to do that, but especially white men, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think what struck me, a lot of things, again, like I said, it's kind of rare that I think he might be the first white dude we've had on for a while, at least, and especially around what he does, where he applies leadership and gender balance, as he referred to it as. And I think his approach is unique, and I think it matches kind of his style. It's different than mine because my mine is much more of the agitator, as you know, which is I think it's important to celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's important to amplify voices and et cetera, et cetera. That's great. That's not, and I do that, I hope. But my main thing is to agitate men. And I say agitate in the sense of like, here's a great example. And you really were the first to challenge me on this. I think Emily, my prior business partner, I think she did to some extent, and some other women friends over the years. But that is that intention doesn't really matter. And it's something that I've learned, and now I've said this in my way, is the phrase of, well, that's not what I intended. People that are disempowered don't get to say that. If you're a black or brown person, you get pulled over by the cops and you were going 3 miles over the speed limit and you say, I didn't mean to, that doesn't carry any weight. Or if we're watching the series House with Andre, as our as our family show that we're watching now, and it's so cringy how misogynistic he can be in the show, and how wildly inappropriate he is, and it would be easy to say, well, that's not his intention. He has a good heart. And what I have learned is that's bullshit. It does not matter what your intention is. It is, and I've said this many times too, is you are not responsible for how other people perceive you, but you are 100% responsible for how other people receive you, your energy. And so that's the thing that I thought was interesting, is in particular is he and I are trying to do as straight white dudes, trying to do kind of the same thing. And he's doing it in a more, I mean, like you said, he can be very direct, but he's doing it in a more of like this idea that this is good for business and it's good for culture and things like this. And mine is more like, the way you think is hurting people and it's hurting you. It's the way you think. And so that was just something that I thought was interesting, the how he and I are.
I think
Yeah.
I think we need both. Both
Right.
approaches are
Definitely.
equally necessary and equally important and equally useful. Because he said something that I knew, but it hit me so strong when he said we are in a leadership crisis. We don't have good leaders. And it's true. You think about name. When you can actually name the people that you think are good leaders, especially the ones that are public, and you can name them, we don't have enough. And when you ask generation, and there are many studies about that, how we are turning to more apathic people. We're becoming more apathic about what's happening in the world, and about pain and discrimination and oppression and violence and all that. And especially the new generation, many of their answer is like, we don't have anyone to follow. We don't have a leader that really truly inspires us. And that is true. So we do have a leadership crisis in the world, and we need to address that. And leadership is a holistic approach to influence and lead people in a certain direction. And we need challengers. We need to get people out of their comfort zone, because that is where the worst thing happens, actually, in the
Yeah.
comfort zone. I mean, you
Right.
can confront and you can fight people that are actively doing harm. You can call them by their name. You can call their actions. You can do a call out, say like, hey, that you're doing is harmful because of this, and it's pretty obvious, and you can prove it. People that are not doing anything and staying on the side, being apathetic and pretending that they are not doing anything bad and therefore they're good, those are very harmful as well. And
Right.
that's what you do. You choose bullshit on them and
Right.
say like, hey, no, you
Yeah.
think you're innocent, you're actually being as harmful or even worse
Yeah.
than, because you're keeping the status quo as it is for the
Yes.
long term.
Yes. And this is why I'm also a critic of what I call patronizing patriarchy. You see this with a lot of white liberal men, white progressive men, which is like they're doing you a favor by elevating you, and they talk like a feminist, and they say that, well, I'm a feminist, and this is rather harsh, but I think it's partially true. Is I think they're just trying to get laid, just in a different way. In many cases, they know how to talk the language, and it's there's a because progressivism is not a panacea for like enlightenment. It's not. There's many flawed things within progressivism, around critical thinking and free speech and a bunch of other things. And so it's even then, those are the people that I challenge as well, the men I challenge as well. It's like, women do not need you to be their like their booster. Most of the time they just need you to shut the fuck up and like just like stand down. I think that's more what it is. And also like read the room and have some self-awareness, and to realize like, I will never know what it's like to be a woman. And so to make this series of assumptions that I think this is what women need in order to feel more a sense of belonging and all that is, um, I find that to be wildly arrogant when I see that especially from progressive
Yeah,
men. It's like, you
yeah.
don't have a uterus, or maybe you got other things that that maybe you felt like you didn't have a power advantage, but we don't know. And so it's the projection that we know, and this is why I can't stand the term ally in that case. Like, he alluded to it as well. So did Dr. Prince when we had him on our episode too about the concept of allyship. Is this realization that I'm just repeating myself, so I'll stop.
Yeah, discourse is, I mean, anybody can learn the language, anybody can learn the discourse and repeat it. But if your actions are not aligned to what you think is right and what you're saying, then it can do a disservice actually for the people
That's
that
right.
you think you're trying to help, because
Yes.
that's where a lot of the backlash from the system comes from also, that saying like, oh, they attack the discourse, they attack the radicalization of some ideas without, and all the fight gets in words and semantics instead of actually behaving in a different way and influence other people to behave in a different way. But it happens also, unfortunately, it happens also with even women that and I can say that, you can, but I can't say that as a feminist, that we have a lot of women call themselves feminists and their behavior is very oppressive towards other women, towards young women or women of color or women. Well, women are women, right? And having the discourse of equality without working on yourself and your level of consciousness and what it means in daily life and what it means in every behavior and what it means in the tone that you use and what it means of all the meaning of really embracing the values and the belief that everybody should be treated equally, or at least in an
Yes.
equitable, in an equity, help me here with
Equitable. Yeah.
equity.
Uh-huh.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a big gap. And so we're learning the discourse faster because it's a trend somehow. At least it's a trend for the opposition, like, we're going to oppose the system, so we're going to learn the language that is challenging the system. But that doesn't mean that you're really in it. And behaviors, as you said, intentions, and I said
Oh
that
man,
actually,
you did. I
intentions,
learned that from
they
you.
don't matter. They don't matter when your actions are conveying other things.
Right. And your actions, this goes back to that Spanish word of consequente. is that your actions, even if they on the surface look good, if they're not attached to some moral integrity, also don't matter, and that's where that consistency comes in. Last thing is, I love that his smash the patriarchy and embracing that is not a political statement. It is a root cause analysis statement. Like, he has named the thing that needs to be changed, as opposed to, it's not like a bumper sticker. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that shows a level of awareness.
Yes. Yeah, we need more like that. We need
Yes.
to have this conversation and take this kind of conversation, that what it means for men, for instance, and why it matters for you, and why you should embrace it as your cause, not women's cause. But all that conversation, reflections between men about masculinity, what it means to be a true man, a man, a true man.
Mm-hmm.
What we mean by that now in these times, what we should mean by that, and how we become that, and how it will benefit you as much as the rest of us.
Yes.
So I'm
All
grateful
right.
for him and for
Me
you.
too. And I for you. All right. Thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for another episode of the Massive Change Show. As always, if you have any good guests, any system shakers, please let us know. And thank you very much.
Thank you.